Hello, everyone. My name is Heather Kiefer. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to first introduce our first presenter, who is Dr. White. Dr. White has taught a variety of college courses and at The Ohio State, North Carolina State University, and Virginia Tech over the last 25 years. He is an academic generalist and has worked at several different academic departments, with the majority of his time being spent in agriculture economics. Thank you so much for presenting, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Heather. Hello, folks. Alex White here, coming to you from the beautiful Getting Snowed On campus at Virginia Tech. They've asked me to talk to you today about some of the hurdles you're going to face in your future, whether you go into academia or whether you go into industry. So I'm going to give you my quick and dirty version. Again, this is my opinions. This is what I've observed. And it may be, the real world may be different in other parts of the United States, but I'm going to tell you what I see and what I think. So why'd they ask me to do this? Well, I survived grad school. I got my degrees at Ohio State and Virginia Tech. Since I've been on faculty, I've been on several master's and PhD committees. I've been teaching for just shy of 30 years now in both non-tenure track and tenure track positions. I work closely with industry as part of my teaching position. And I also do a lot of basically extension or extension-like programming. And I've also been an independent business consultant for the last 20 years. So I've kind of talked from this from different angles. So now that you're in grad school, just some real quick piece of advice. My mentor told me that there's three things that are key to being successful in grad school. And that is, one, you need to have a good advisor. Okay, so make sure you get an advisor you can work with, a good mentor, a colleague, or treat that person as a mentor and a colleague. Have a good plan of study, so make sure it's flexible. It allows you to take the courses you need. It doesn't just give you depth in one area, but it gives you breadth across several areas. That makes you more marketable. And you need a good research project or case project, whatever your program requires. If you're interested in it, it makes it a whole lot more fun. So go ahead, and if you can get 2 out of those things, you'll be successful and you'll have a whole lot of fun. And remember, the people that you're in grad school with, your faculty members, not just your advisor, but all the faculty members, the other grad students, and faculty in other departments is a great network for you for the future. So make sure you get out there and look not just at your school, but other schools. Expand that network as far as you possibly can. And have fun. Grad school was a blast. All right, so if you're looking at going into academia, you have, I'm going to call it 3 main areas: teaching, extension, and research. If you want to get into the administrative side, more power to you. That's not my area of interest, and I don't have a lot of experience there. But I do have a lot of experience with teaching. And just to let you know, if you want to be a teacher, don't look at it as, oh, I have to go in and teach. Look at it as, I can't wait to get in the room and teach. You have to have a passion for it. I talk to folks about the Lightbulb Moment. This is when you're working with a student and they're struggling with the material a little bit. They can't quite get it. And then all of a sudden their eyes get bright, they perk up, and the light bulb comes on, and you can see them gain the confidence and really excel with the material. That is all the reward I need from teaching. So I think any good teacher will tell you that. It's helping people improve themselves. My personal mission statement for teaching, or for anything, is I want to help people improve their lives by teaching them to make better decisions, or helping them make better decisions. Another thing, we kind of get fall into this trap as grad students. We talk a different language. You're used to talking the science. You're used to talking the vernacular of the laboratory of graduate classes. When you're talking with students at any level, you need to be able to relate to them. So don't try and impress them with big words. They're going to go over their heads. They're going to roll their eyes at you. What you need to do is impress them with your ability to get that information across in a way that they can use it. So it needs to be meaningful. It needs to be applied. And the easier or the better job you do of making it applied, the better job they will do of absorbing the material. Okay, some of the hurdles in teaching. A lot of people don't realize that. They think, oh, you're only in the classroom for an hour or two a day. There's a lot of prep time that goes into getting ready for your lectures. There's the lecture itself, which can be depending on the class. If it's a really active class, boy, you'll use a lot of energy. Or if it's a really dull class, if the class just sits there and stares at you like Zombieland, that sucks the emotions right out of you. That can be really tiring as well. But there's the grading, the late night grading and weekends spent grading. There's recruiting, there's placement, trying to get internships and jobs for your students. There's dealing with student issues. They'll come into you and say, hey, I just got this job offer, or these 2 job offers, which ones do you think are best for me? Or I'm having these troubles at home or whatever. So there's some good and bad student issues you need to deal with. And there's going to be a lot of administrative effort and committee work that you're going to be dealing with in addition to your teaching. So a couple of problems you're going to find are staying current. A lot of times you get really busy and you think, oh, I'll just use last year's material. Try not to do that. Try to use cutting edge, up-to-date examples. But occasionally you're going to get behind time and have to fall into that. It's always fun to listen or to read your student evaluations. You're going to get really good ones and you're going to get really bad ones. It doesn't matter how you're teaching, how good you are. There's always 2 or 3 that hate you. I'm going to say read them first, get them out of the way, and then read the good ones and focus on the good ones. But regardless, use your teaching evaluations to improve on your teaching. Okay. I don't really put a lot of stock in student evaluations because I get them at the end of the semester after the class is over. So I try and ask my students for feedback throughout the semester to make the class better for them. Some other things to think about teaching is what is your course load? 100%, this is going to vary by institution, but 100% teaching is normally somewhere around 3 to 4 courses per semester. If you're teaching labs, they're included in that 3 to 4, okay? Or they're included with the lecture section. So you can really be stacked up if you're teaching 100% load. Another thing is when you're first teaching, you have to develop the course. And if it's a brand new course, we have to get it through the system. There's a big committee system. You have to send your proposal through, send your syllabus through, and that can really eat up a lot of time and effort. It can be really frustrating at times. But just realize developing a new course, you have to have support for it. You have to justify it. You have to have a logical plan for that course. And it's going to go through at least 2 or 3 committees before you can teach it. I guess another thing you need to think about with teaching, if you're a 100% teacher, that doesn't mean you're only evaluated on teaching. Every academic position has a research and or an extension expectation with it. So if you're 100% teaching, you still need to write some articles, whether it's popular press articles or teaching journal articles or a little research article here and there. That will be an expectation. So how do you prepare to be a career in teaching? 1, go out and watch good teachers on campus. Go ask around who are the best teachers, and then see if you can figure out which or where they teach, and then just go talk to them, go sit through their class, see how they manage the class, how do they handle questions from the class, how do they deliver the material, what's their philosophy? Most of them are going to make you think. So go watch the good teachers, get some experience now. Get in and do a 15-minute guest lecture in a class, lead an in-class exercise, be responsible for a section of a class, do something to get some experience now. And one of the best pieces of advice I got when I first started teaching, as an old farmer told me this, he said, Al, don't teach them or don't ask them to calculate the square footage of the wall. Ask them to calculate how many gallons of paint it will take to cover it. Because if you just ask them what's the square footage, they'll go through a formula and they won't really realize why. But if you make it applied, that's going to really drive home why it's important, why they need to know it. And you know what? It's going to make it more fun for them to learn as well. One piece of advice I have for you if you want to get into teaching, and I mean this seriously, take an acting class. Every time you go in front of the class and give a lecture, it's basically a performance. If you're having a bad day, you can't let that get in the way. You have to put on a good face. So think about taking an acting class to help prepare. If you want to go into extension, I love extension because you're out there working with the industry. You're working with real world folks. What you're going to have to do is develop your program. And this is going to involve figuring out what your clientele needs or what they want. You need to pair that with your strengths And you also have to pair that with what the administration wants. And a lot of times it's in three completely different areas. So this is going to be one of the struggles you're going to face. I'm going to say focus on your strengths, get a couple programs under your belt with that, and then slowly branch out. So don't try to be everything to everybody. Focus on your strengths at first till you get more comfortable. Tag team, work with somebody else. Get out there, and especially if there's an experienced extension agent or extension specialist in your field, work with them on a regular basis. Learn from them, see how they do it. Build your programs off of theirs so you have good complementarity. And again, remember, if you are 100% extension, you still are responsible for research and possibly teaching. So these are some, it's not uncommon. If you're 100% extension, you might teach a class, say 15% there. And we always joke, there's always a 50% research component to your appointment. When it comes to extension, possibly more than the research and teaching side, there's a huge time management issue. You are expected to be available to your clients by phone, or in the office. So that makes it sort of an 8 to 5 job. Most of your programs are going to be held when the producers or when your clientele are available, and a lot of times that's in the evenings or on weekends. So 8 to 5 job during the day, programs during the evenings. On weekends, you're going to be going and working with the 4-H groups or the FFA groups or the fairs or something or other. So time management is critical when it comes to working in extension. Okay, another thing with extension, you need to figure out how you're going to finance your programs. There are grants available, but there's relatively small. There's not a whole lot of them. They're very specific. And because there aren't many, it's pretty competitive. But you still need to get out there and play the grant game, try and raise as much cash as you can for your programs. And that will also look good when it comes to your evaluation. But just from my experience at 3 or 4 different universities, extension has always faced the do more with less problem. Hey, okay, we're cutting your budget this year, but you still need to put on your programs. And by the way, add this program as well. Here's where I'm going to hurt some feelings out there. In the world of academics, there's the research, the teaching, and the extension appointments. And from what I've seen at my universities, extension might be perceived as the lowest on the pecking order there. So it's less glamorous than the research and so on. I'm going to tell you, I think that the extension portion makes it vastly more fun and rewarding. You're working with producers in industry. You're out there solving real world problems. And to me, that's much more fun than just writing a journal article that maybe 5 people might read, if it's one that I wrote anyway. But being out there with industry, it allows you to listen to their needs. It allows you to tailor your research program to actual problems. And this is going to help you get a lot of popular press articles. It's going to get you a real strong following. So even though it may be perceived in some areas as less glamorous, personally, I love having an extension appointment. When it comes to research, you always hear the publisher perish. There's an awful lot of truth for that. So just be prepared. That's one of the big issues with advancement or tenure process. So know the expectations clearly when you start your job. Ask what are the average number of articles you need to have, over your 5-year introductory period. Which journals are acceptable or which ones are not as highly valued. Get that in writing so that you know it up front. I'm going to say tag team with other researchers. What you might do is work with 2 or 3 other folks that have some knowledge of your area and get together and submit your articles as a team. Now all of you are starting to get your publications out there. Maybe you take the lead on one journal or one article, and then you help with 2 or 3 others. Well, guess what? That could be 4 possible articles within the first year or so. So there's strength in numbers. Work with others. Don't think you have to go it alone. And folks, find a mentor. Get out there and find somebody that can help you walk through the process so that they know they can help you figure out what works, what doesn't, what are some tips for getting that success rate. Also, we're going to have some grants. The old saying, it's all about the Benjamins. Again, clearly know the expectations once you start or before you start, how many dollars, how many grants, and so on. Remember the old phrase, singles and doubles are better than home runs. If you try and get that $500,000 or $2 million NIH grant, that's wonderful. But until then, it's hard to get that one. If you can get a $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 grant here and there, that's going to keep your programs viable. Let's see, what else? Most universities have how-to programs about grants. Attend them, find out how it works at your university, what the system is, and so on. And a big key for you is tell a consistent story in the RFP or in your grant application. Too often you say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do, and here's what the goals are, and here's the methods, but you don't weave the story to let know how everything's connected. So if you do that, I think you'll have better success. In general, when it comes to academia, you have the administrative requirements. There's always the reporting, your annual report of how many papers you gave and how many talks you gave and so on. Keep good records. Realize there's a service requirement. You're going to be on several committees, and that takes time. You might be advising students. That can take a lot of time, but it's awful rewarding. You might be advising a club. You're going to be helping with recruiting and placement. All of these things are expected in some way, shape, or form. And then remember, there's community requirements. You are expected to be a good citizen in your community. So if you have a social media presence, tone it down or go under a different name. When you want to go out and enjoy yourself, cut loose, let your hair down, you might want to go across state lines. You don't really want your students or other folks seeing you having a good time. That sort of breaks down some barriers. All right, we've got about 5 minutes here to talk about some industry hurdles. So I guess one of the big industry hurdles we always see is, well, how do I get hired when everybody wants 3 years of experience? I'm going to say use your education as experience. If you have a master's and a PhD, well, there's 4, 5, 6 years of experience. Just word your resume to, so that it shows that. Find ways to get practical applications. So do some internships or volunteering. If nothing else, this increases your network. It's going to help you get your foot in the door. Don't just have one resume. Tailor your resume for each individual opportunity. If you're looking at a research position, highlight in your resume your research skills and accomplishments. If you're looking at extension, well, let's focus on how you are as far as working with industry. What's your industry experience, as well as that some of that research experience. So tailor your resume. Use your advisors and so on as your network. They have a vast network. Use it, okay? And they are willing to help you. And again, just do your experience ahead of time. If you want to get into a certain field, know what licenses are required or what coursework is required, and get it out of the way. Just build your resume as you go. How about this one? The young punk syndrome. You're going to go out there in agriculture and you're going to be working with older folks who have been farming or in the industry for quite a while, and a lot of them are very cynical. So you need to be able to prove your abilities, prove your attitude there, that you have a good positive attitude and that you want to help people. And one of my mentors always said, no one cares how much you know unless they know how much you care. So let them know you're out there to help them. You're not trying to show them up. You're not trying to replace them. You're trying to help. And another big piece of advice is listen more than you speak. The industry producers know an awful lot. They've gone through real world experience where you've gone through more academic experience. So learn from them. I didn't learn true economic principles until I was out working with low income families. That's when the things I learned in class really were driven home. Another thing, don't try and impress them by speaking at a higher level or at the academic level. Learn the vernacular. Don't use terms like confidence interval when you're talking to an extension group. Use the term wiggle room. Okay, I have this much where I can, prices can go up down by 10% rather than the 95% confidence interval. Ladies, just be prepared. You are going to be faced with some gender discrimination in agriculture anyway, probably other industries. But you're going to be tested hard. Why? Because you are a young female. So keep a positive attitude. And a very successful lady business owner around here said, kill them with kindness. If nothing else, just be as kind as you can. But stay confident in your abilities. You got the job because you are good. Hold true to your values. Hold true to your ground. and don't let them smell fear. As soon as they do, they'll they'll start looking at you. Humbly prove that you know what you're doing. Okay, don't say, "Ha, I told you this would work." Say, "Boy, I'm glad that worked for you. I hope I can work with you again in the future." And that's not just ladies; that's everybody. And again, find the decision influencers in the community. Let them, or if you work with them, they can turn the tide. They can be your biggest advocates. So just be prepared for that when you hit the working world. Another thing is time management. You just have no idea how much time your job is going to take. It's not a 9-to-5 job. I have never had a 40-hour work week job in my life because when you're not in class or you're not teaching or you're not consulting, you're networking, you're working with FFA and so on. So just be prepared. Build in 1 day a week, if you can, to try and just get caught up on the paperwork and plan ahead for the future and catch your breath, okay? Let's see, another piece of advice I got was never waste a lunch. You know what, you have time, you're taking time off for lunch, well, let's go meet with somebody, do a little networking, kick around some ideas with a coworker, talk to a prospective client. So use that productively. So here we go. Just to finish up, I think one of the best things you can do to clear any hurdle is just have a positive attitude. Okay, if you do that, that's going to help you rise above the rest of the group out there. So have that positive have a can-do, optimistic attitude. Don't let hurdles get in your way. I think a good subject is always listen more than you speak. Okay, listen, think about what's going on, make up your mind, then speak and speak your mind, and realize you will learn whatever you're studying now. You'll really learn it once you graduate. Once it's really put in there, or once you hit the working world, it really helps you learn these things. Next thing, don't go it alone. Always look for help when you need it of any type. So with that, I'm going to just make a little note here. Take your mental health seriously. If you find yourself getting depressed or getting down, seek help immediately, but always find somebody to work with, whether it's for tag team programming or whether it's with any health needs you might have. And finally, just be true to yourself, stay true to your principles, because you have to look in the mirror every morning and live with whatever you've done. And I think that will make life a lot better for you. Well, folks, I have run out of time. There's what I have to say about hurdles in your future. So I guess we can go ahead and try and take some questions here.
Great. So we have about 8 minutes for a few questions before we get started on the next presentation. One of the questions we have for you is, do you think there are any bad or tougher appointments? Is a 75-25% a better breakdown than a 50-50 one, or does it really matter?
That's a great question, and it depends on the job and which component you're in. I would say that if you're in a three-way appointment, 33-33-33 or 50-25-25, that's tough because then your expectations are really ramped up. I think I would probably prefer a 75-25 appointment in most cases. That means, if you're teaching, you're not full out teaching. It gives you time to slow up and catch your breath, but you can also get out there and work with the industry as well. If you haven't, let's say, a 25% appointment, extension appointment. So you don't see many 100% appointments anymore. Most of them that I've seen are 50-50 or 75-25.
Great. Do you think it's harder to get a position teaching in dairy, or if you're specializing in a specific area, do you think that's harder or easier?
I think today getting a job specifically in dairy is probably going to be harder. What I would do is focus, not just that you have a dairy background or a dairy research topic, see how that translates to other areas, whether it's the health field or the animal science field or the biology field. Some folks will automatically call you out of the workforce or the application pool when they see dairy. But if you can make it broad for a lot of positions, I think that will help you. If it is a specific dairy science opportunity, then I would build up my dairy background as much as I possibly could because there's fewer of us all the time.
Awesome. What is the difference between an extension professor and a normal professor? I don't I don't think that's really understood.
Yeah, that's just based on your appointment. If you are 100% extension, you're going to be an extension specialist. And with that, you're going to support the area extension agents. You're going to be responsible for providing leadership to the overall extension program. So you may not be out there giving as many programs in person, but you will be supporting the area agents and the other extension folks in moving them towards that overall program goal.
How do you engage students and keep the classroom fun? Do you have a formula for that?
I'm just stupid. I let my ADD kick in and go off on different tangents. I try to keep it flexible. I try and keep it applied. I'll try and, I get to know my students pretty well because I don't have a whole lot of students in my applied classes. So I'll use their experiences, try and relate things to things they're familiar with. But I try and do demonstrations, trying to show, okay, this is what depreciation actually is, or here's, pour a gallon of milk and then start pouring out. Half of it goes for feed, half of it or a third of it goes for labor and so on. Just try different things. Students today don't like the old stand and deliver lecture style that I grew up with. Millennials and today's students, you need to be more active. That's why I say take an acting class. I wish I would have taken one. I probably still will take one though. But just try and make it relatable. Don't get too serious. And sometimes, a lot of times I find out that students learn the material better if you go outside their discipline. If you're trying to teach dairy science principles, maybe talk about beef cattle or sheep or people instead, and they can grasp those concepts. But then they don't, if they focus on dairy, they have, I call it inbreeding. They already have experiences. They think they know what's best. So if you kind of stretch them out into other topic areas, it helps them understand the material.
What is the most challenge working with extension?
Oh boy, there's lots of challenges. It's figuring out where the direction of your program. And again, that's your clients want to hear one thing, the administration wants you to do something else, and you have strengths in a different area. Another thing you're going to find with extension is there's always one person in the crowd that thinks they know more than everybody else. And they will test you and push you. And what you need to do is work to get that person on your side. So if you can get them to believe in you, then life is a heck of a lot easier. Otherwise, at every meeting you have, they're going to be a thorn in your side. So I've had that happen several times, and now some of those folks are my biggest supporters.
Great. I think for our last question, we'll say, is there any advice transitioning from graduate school into an industry position?
Couple of pieces of advice. One, don't chase dollars. If you go out and take the highest paying job you can find and you don't like the job, you will burn out very quickly. So find a job that you really like, that follows your core values, that's going to lead you down the road to the future. Learn. Don't be the know-it-all. So when you get into the new position, learn the corporate culture, try and fit in, and learn their way of doing things. Ask lots of questions. When in doubt, ask a question. Employers hate it when you do something without asking. So make sure you know what you're doing before you do it. Other than that, realize that when you're in school, you're doing a lot of homework, you're doing a lot of research. You think, oh, I'll never have to do this once I hit the working world. Realize you never stop learning. You will be working on proposals. You'll be working on your consulting projects. You'll be crunching numbers at night on weekends. And that's not a bad thing if you love what you're doing. Time flies if you do that. So realize it's a different lifestyle. You're not going to have the time commitments you have in college because you have to be in class at a certain time, or it's more structured. But you're going to have to manage your time a whole lot more closely once you hit the working world.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. White. We really appreciate you talking with us. Our second presenter is going to be Dr. Eric Bastian. Dr. Bastian began his career as a professor at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Food Science and Nutrition. He was then hired as the director of R&D at what is now Glanbia and continued to get promoted there. But then in July of 2016, he joined Dairy West, where he is currently the vice president of industry relations. And in 2019, he also became the director of the Western Dairy Center. So at this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Bastian to speak.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, our topic today is overcoming challenges that we face in the dairy industry, and really appreciate Doc White and his comments today and talking very specifically about your future careers and hurdles you might face, particularly in academia and that kind of an environment where he has, all those years of experience to share with us. Really appreciate those comments. I'm going to take you in a slightly different direction today to talk about some of the challenges that I see facing us as a dairy industry. And some of these challenges are going to take a while for us to overcome them. Some of them we're getting some ground on. But I wanted to add just a couple of comments on to what Doc White has already talked to us about doing research in an academic setting. The first thing that I want to mention to you is that when you're thinking about research, you have your research area that you love, right? When you go, people will always talk about my research. Well, having my research is great as long as I can find grantors who care about my research and that area of study. So, you can get along for a little bit, maybe with some internal funding at the university when you first get hired, but pretty soon you've got to be working on external funds. And one of the real challenges that you're going to find in an academic environment is, how do I get out there and work the granting system and find those dollars that are going to fund the research that I'm interested in doing? So that's one hurdle or challenge that you might spend some time thinking about and talking about with those who have had experience doing it. So we'll just encourage you to do that. Another thing is that in the dairy industry, the research that we do, most of it is going to need to be technology development areas where we connect strongly with the industry. It's not so much areas where we can go in and do a lot of fundamental work. So we have to kind of take our research leads from where the industry's going. And that's a particularly important point for you to consider as you're students working through graduate programming yourselves, is kind of where's the industry headed? Where can I see things running? And how do I figure out those relevant research areas that will fit nicely in with the interests that I have that I want to do research on? And it's kind of related to finding grant monies in those areas as well. So I just wanted to comment on those two things. Now, I want to take you into what I think are some real serious challenges that we have as an industry right now. And one of the big challenges, and I've been working on this myself for some time, is our workforce. Now, you young people who are in graduate programming, you're in the Graduate Student Division of the American Dairy Science Association, you're a rare breed. There aren't a lot of you out there. And we have an industry that's growing and growing pretty dynamically and needs people like you to come and train and then work both in academic settings as well as industrial settings. We need all of that. So how do we find youth who can, figure out that this is something they might want to do for a career? Now, as you're working through your graduate career, you have opportunities to reach out and have impact on many other people, including your peers, who some of them may be in completely different areas. Now, as I think about my own educational experience and then those who I've had opportunity to be friends with and colleagues with over many years, most of us, when we were graduate students, we had stipends to help us cover what we were doing. I have a daughter-in-law who's going to dental school. There's no stipend over there, or medical. There's no stipend over there. And that education is quite expensive. So in our area, we have the opportunity to gain education without loading up too much debt. So we can come out of school with a fairly low debt load, and that's a huge thing in this day and age with the costs of education increasing so strongly. So that's a really important thing that I want you all to be thinking about is, how do I get my education without coming out with so much debt? And being in dairy, we can give you those stipends. I hope all of you or most of you have those, and you don't have to take out so much student debt to get through your education. Now, I wanted to change my approach here just a little bit and talk about some of the real challenges facing our dairy industry that I think all of you can help with. We have an immense problem facing us right now with all of the anti-dairy messaging going on, particularly out in social media. So to get ready for this presentation, I just typed in 10 reasons to ditch dairy. So you might just Google that one sometime. And they talk about, there's no worse industry about cruelty to mothers than in the dairy industry. There's no more greenhouse gas than the dairy industry. We produce more than anybody else. So I just want to talk about how do we get some of that truth out there into those channels. Now, I'm part of the baby boomer generation, okay, and the baby boomers are retiring, have been for a while, and are going to continue to retire over the next 5 to 10 years. My generation is not going to solve these problems that are facing us right now. It's going to be you young people who have all those social media talents that you've built up over your lifetime, the ability to interact. And you have to be brave in order to go out there and post truths about dairy. And I'm going to give you a couple of pieces here. So let's talk greenhouse gases and emissions for just a minute. This is a big thing that people come at in the dairy industry all the time, saying that we're destroying the environment. The world would be better off without cows. And so I want to give you just a little bit of information. Sometimes you'll hear people say things like 20% of global greenhouse gas or United States greenhouse gas is due just to dairy cattle. That is an incorrect statement. If you look under the EPA, epa.gov, you'll find that in 2017, they released data about sources of greenhouse gases. And in the United States, all of agriculture, as of the year 2017, contributed 9% to greenhouse gas in the United States. And other industries like transportation are up around 20%. So if all of agriculture is 9%, that puts dairy at a much lower level. So we're probably around 2 to 3% greenhouse gas contributions in the U.S. We need to get that information out all over the social media when people start talking about that cattle are destroying the planet. Another thing that we need to have at our fingertips as we go through these discussions is the number of cows that we have. Does anyone know how many cows we had in 1940 in the United States? There were a lot of cows back then to produce the milk that we needed as a country. And at that time, it was almost all domestically consumed. We have a lot more export market now as an industry than we had back then. We had 25 million dairy cows in 1940. And all of them, as they consume plant-based materials and the rumen functions, they're going to be releasing methane. So we've taken that number down now to where we only have 9.5 million dairy cows. That's a huge reduction in the number of cows, a huge reduction in the greenhouse gas output from these animals. We just need this information to be understood by people. Again, fighting these mistruths that people put out on social media with real data that we can come back on. I want you all to be aware that in the anti-animal activism areas, there are people who are being trained on how to come onto agricultural enterprises. They train them how to instigate people to make them angry. And then they train them to take, secret videos of what happens when people get angry with animals. We've seen some of that happen. This is going to continue to happen. We've seen several of these episodes in the past, and every time it happens, it dings us as an industry. So we have to be very careful about who we're letting come around our operations, making sure we understand the background of people and trying to work against that challenge that's coming against us. Now, from a nutritional perspective, we have so many mistruths being put out about dairy right now. Dairy causes acne. Dairy causes early puberty. Dairy causes cancer. Dairy causes osteoporosis. And we know that it's actually the opposite on osteoporosis. All of these things we have to work on to fight their challenges. And we have data, good data, that we can back up with. A lot of that data sits at the National Dairy Council. We can get our hands on that with just a click of a mouse and get that data and put it out there on the internet. Now, I want to talk about one thing that as people talk about sustainability, there's one thing that I think that we're forgetting, and that we as an industry don't often think about or talk about, but it's prevalent through all of the dairy nutrition books that I have on my shelf, and those are old ones because I took my dairy coursework about 100 years ago. Anyway, these courseworks, this dairy background that we have, has taught for a long time that the real benefit of cattle, dairy cattle, is the ability to take something that we cannot use, humans cannot eat, and turn it into high value, high quality foods, including the high quality proteins that we find in milk and dairy. I call this the Cellulose Paradox, okay? Because we have a lot of people out here saying we need to get rid of all animals on the planet. We need to go all vegan, 100% plant-based. And so we have this plant-based everything coming as an onslaught right now. But we're forgetting one major thing, and that is that half of the organic carbon. Now, when I talk about organic carbon, I'm talking about energy sources for us as humans. Okay, organic carbon sits in protein. How many calories do we get from eating protein? That's 4. How many calories do we get from eating fat? That's another carbon, organic carbon source. We get 9 calories there. We get 4 calories out of carbohydrate consumption. All of this stuff is important to us as humans. It's how we get our energy when we eat food. But what we cannot do is eat plant foods that contain a lot of cellulose and expect that we're going to get energy there. And half of the organic carbon on planet Earth is sitting inside cellulose. That's a massive energy pool that we cannot access as humans. There's only one way we can get at it, and that's through our ruminant friends. They can get that cellulose. They can convert it into products that then we can eat, milk, meat, and so on. So I want you to, as you think about sustainability and people talk about nutritional sustainability, we need to be thinking about how we're going to feed the 9 billion people in 2050. We're going to need every source of food we have, not just plants. We're going to need everything we have to feed that population. And so we have to have access to this cellulose that's just so important for us to get at. And these animals, these ruminants, can give us access to that energy pool that otherwise we cannot get to. And our social media friends don't understand that. And we're not putting it out there as an industry. We need to be putting it out there. So I'm asking for your help to help us, all of you who are so socially active out there, to help us put this information out so that we can combat it. Another thing that comes against us frequently is antibiotics. But we do a significant amount of antibiotic testing. Every truckload gets tested before it can be unloaded. If they test any slight amount of antibiotic in a truck, that truck is removed from the supply chain. So we have a very diligent antibiotic testing program in our industry that nothing gets through. And so we need to be making those kind of statements out to people who come against us on the antibiotic pieces. All right. Now, I just want to finish. I'm going to give you a little bit more time for questions because I've hit on some fairly controversial areas. So let's maybe spend some time on that. There's just one more thing. The future of our industry depends upon you young people. I just want you to get that in your minds. It isn't about people who have been in the industry for a long time. It isn't about me. It's about you. I want to tell you a little bit about what I've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years of my life. I got to a point working inside a company to where I could not find people to hire who understood milk and how to process it. Just simple as that. The people weren't there to hire. And so I got pretty passionate about, well, how do we overcome this problem? I started throwing a little money from the company that I had back to some of the universities where the training had been going on, but it had almost disappeared completely. And so now I'm working in an area where we have a decent sized budget, working with our dairy producers through the checkoff programming, as well as we're working with our industry partners, and we have several of them who also put money into our programming to help set up research that's relevant to our industry, that we can bring young people on. We go around and recruit young people like yourselves onto these programs so that we can get more people trained in dairy, milk, understanding of milk, and milk processing. Now, I live on the process side, and a checkoff program started in 1984. It's 15 cents for every 100 pounds of milk. Many of you are aware of the checkoff program. The checkoff program continues. These are the main dollars that we're using to fund these research efforts to help train the future workforce. Every time I go to any conference in our industry, the dairy industry, this is what I hear people saying. We have to innovate. We have to innovate. We have to innovate. We need new markets. We need new places to put our products. And I agree with them. And the one thing that I have found over a lifetime of working on innovation, both inside academia and also inside dairy industry, a dairy company. I worked for Glanbia for almost 20 years. The innovation requires a certain resource that's rare and hard to find, and that's a creative mind. We have to have creative minds in order to do the innovation. I've seen companies say, we're going to build an innovation facility, and they go out and put some bricks and mortars and equipment and processing equipment stuff, culinary capability on the ground. But that does not necessarily mean that they're going to innovate, because that rare resource that really drives innovation is a creative mind that you all have. So we need you. We need more of you. We need the future creative minds who can go out and build the innovation that our industry has to have. Now, we're talking about going to 20% of our milk that's produced in the United States being exported outside the country. Well, we're going to do that. We've got to majorly innovate, but in markets that exist outside of our own. And we don't understand those very well. We have to get boots on the ground in some of these markets with innovators like yourselves, people who can go in, understand the culture, understand even the language, and start to work on innovation for areas outside the United States where we look to ship milk products. The two biggest areas for export for us have been in Mexico, that's our #1 trading partner, and in Asia. So those areas, yes, we're moving products in there, but we need to understand a lot better what those people, those consumers in those products want. And I heard recently, and I don't know if this is true, but I'm going to share it with you because it struck me as really interesting, that the Chinese government are using CRISPR technology to gene edit their own people to give them the lactase gene so that they can digest milk. Why do they want this? Because they understand the nutritional value of milk. They understand that it helps people grow, stature, physical strength, all these things are improved when people are consuming dairy. And this is what a lot of people in our country have forgotten about, and we need to re-educate them on. Now, let's see, I've got about 10 minutes left. I think with that, I'm going to try to wrap it up and spend a little bit more time on Q&A. So let's start talking. I know there are going to be a few of you who want to talk about some of these areas that we've mentioned, and maybe others as well. So I'll open it up and we'll take the last 10 minutes in questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to read the questions for you. How do we best educate people on everything that dairy is doing?
Well, I think that, number one, we have to arm ourselves with data and with truth. I think data speaks loudly, but we have a lot of people out there that don't want science. And we have to be able to communicate to those people, because they're not using science to communicate to us. If you Google out the 10 top reasons to ditch dairy, and there's no science in there. So we have to be able just to communicate back the truth about dairy and put it out there. In some areas, in some sectors, in some demographics, the data will make a difference. But there are some that the data, they won't even care about it. But we just have to put the information out there and try to get it to grow and spread, just like they're doing against us now.
Great. The next question is, Dr. Bastian, how do we oh, sorry, it just disappeared. How do we combat animal rights activists on social media? I would love to post more about the industry, but I've had a really negative experience with an activist. Do you have any resources with dealing with them or any tips?
Well, again, I think it takes a lot of bravery to go out there and make comments. I think that, I've had personal interactions with activists, and those people are never going to believe anything we say. Okay, so sometimes we can't really engage certain groups of people, but those people are the ones who are posting all this stuff on social media, and then people who are less aware and don't maybe have such a strong position are reading that and starting to be swayed by it. We need to be able to sway them the other direction. And so I think that just putting our messages out in more standard social media channels, not trying to take on specific animal activists, I think that's a losing game. And besides that, when we start getting defensive is when we start to lose. We need to maintain the positive messaging that we have. If we start to dig our heels in, and I'm guilty of this, I dig my heels in. You can probably feel me digging my heels in. I have to work really hard myself to try not to do that, to try to stay calm, try to stay positive, because that's the only way that we can really have an effect with those people out there who are sitting on the fence and don't know which way to go. Those are the ones we really need to convince. We're not likely going to convince some of these real strong animal activists, but they're not a very large group, as it turns out. But they're having some sway because they're using the potent social media avenues that we need to be more potent in using ourselves. And that's why I'm saying to all of us, let's all of us, as a concerted effort, get more out in social media and push these things.
Great. The next question is, there's a food science PhD grad on Instagram and Facebook by the handle of Food Science Babe, and she debunks food science myths. She is awesome. Are you familiar with her account?
Food Science Babe. Well, we've also got another one called the Dairy Babe. So there's a few of these out here. But yes, I'm familiar with that one. Was that the question?
Yeah. Have universities considered incorporating humanities requirement for all college students to include an agriculture class, similar to how all agriculture students have to take an art or history class?
Well, I think we used to have that actually many years ago in a lot of the universities in our country, but we've completely moved away from that. I think it'd be valuable for everybody to take a course in agriculture. Now, I have a sister that teaches agricultural literature. She's in the English department at a university. She's teaching agricultural literature, so that's a way that she gets it done through a what you would normally think as a non-agricultural department. So there are ways to do this, but it'd be awesome if we could do that. Maybe we need to think about a concerted effort to work with our universities, particularly our land-grant universities. All the land-grant universities are based on agriculture, at least they were initially. So we need to be, at least in those universities, thinking about just having that basic course in agriculture, because we have so many people now who just do not understand how food is produced and how it gets marketed and through the distribution channels and onto their table.
Yeah. What do you think is the next big technology you see being utilized for the dairy industry?
Oh, that's a tough question. There's a lot of new technology coming. Is this question more at farm level, or are we talking more at processor level?
I think however you take it, I think this is a farm level person asking the question.
Yeah, I think on the farm side, what we're seeing right now is a fairly significant move on the labor front. So we've had a lot. Now, let me just say this, on the immigration, we don't have a good way to bring agricultural workers into our country and have them work here. We need that to happen. There have been some bills going through Congress. The House actually passed one bill that was agriculturally focused to help support our agricultural worker programs. But right now, as our producers are looking at this, they're seeing that it has been a very significant challenge for them to find workers who can work on the farms, particularly. And so what we see happening here is, as robotics have taken their hold, a lot of movement onto robotics. We have several dairies in our area here in Idaho now, and I know it's going on across the country, that have gone to robots to milk, simply because they do not have the ability to maintain their workforce on farm. So that's a technology that's certainly driving, and I think we're going to see a lot more of into the future. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is it provides an opportunity for somebody. If you study robotics and you want to work in agriculture, there's going to be massive opportunities for you. And that's not only at the farm level, but also at the processor level, because they all have robots too, stacking pallets and doing all these things. And if you understand robotics, you're going to have a hot spot for yourself in the future. It's going to be big.
Great. So the next question is, your voice towards innovative product development is very important. What about innovation in our milk production model? Do you or Dr. White have any ideas on how to work with our producers and market to make it possible for producers to stay in business while our animals become more efficient producers? Could you see a quota system being effective in the future?
Well, I might ask Dr. White to come in on this question, because honestly, I grew up on a dairy farm, but I'm quite a few years removed from it, so I'm probably not as current as he is. But the technology question we just had kind of links to what you're talking about here. As we drive technology on dairy farming, that all of our technological drives allow us to produce more milk from fewer animals. Our efficiencies keep going up. And, as I looked at it even 10 or 15 years ago, I thought, man, we got to be hitting a plateau here right away. But we haven't. We've continued to increase in our efficiency of milk production on farm. And as we've done that, we've continued to increase the total amount of milk we produce in our country. Because dairy farmers are interesting. When times get tough, guess what they do? They add more cows to their herd. And when times are good, guess what they do? They add more cows to the herd. That's generally what we see. So it doesn't really matter what they're facing. They keep increasing the amount of milk that they're putting out. That's why it's so adamant for us to be innovating in areas outside the country, in Mexico and China and other areas that we aren't touching right now. I think the Middle East probably holds a significant future piece for us if we can crack that nut. Now, did I answer the question?
I think so. But Dr. Wright, do you have anything to add?
I would agree with Dr. Bastian. One of the big problems the dairy industry have is we are too good at producing milk. There is a definite supply issue out there. Demand has been decreasing in some areas for fluid milk, but we're starting to see an increase in the demand for cheeses, butters, and so on. But we are highly dependent on that international trade. So part of the question is how do we keep our producers in production right now? They need to treat it like a business. You always hear the phrase farming is not a business, it's a way of life. No, it's a business. We need to treat it that way. We need to think about how we're producing, how we produce more profitably. We have to realize from a simple economic standpoint, we're not making maximum profits when we're producing the maximum milk per cow. That extra feed to get that extra pound of milk out of her, it's just too expensive. So we need to find out a way definitely to be more innovative with the products, sort of like the citrus industry. It used to be when you went to buy a lemon, you bought a lemon. Then somebody said, well, let's squeeze the juice out of the lemon, it'll last longer. And then you realize you're only going to eat so many lemons or use so much lemon juice. So the citrus industry said, hey, let's make candy out of this. And then they said, hey, let's add it to cleaning products. And they kept finding new uses for their product. We need to be just as innovative in the dairy industry. And I think another part of the question here is, can I see a quota system being effective in the future? We used to have a quota system. I would not be surprised at all if the U.S. dairy industry moved back towards that, to have some sort of supply management. And again, the reason is we are too good at producing milk.
Great. Okay, so I think we have time for, oh, I'm so sorry.
Sorry, Heather. I just wanted to add one extra comment to that. That's why the innovation is so critical to us. We're very good at producing milk. We have a future massive increase in population predicted on our planet. We need to feed those people. I mean, we should be in the future looks bright. To me, the future looks bright for dairy as we think about providing the nutrition for 9 billion people on the planet. So we just need to figure out our innovative ways to bring the products to the people where they need it. And the massive populations are not in the United States. We have 330 million people, something like that here. And China and India combined are like almost half the world's population. Those are the areas where we need to figure out what jives with those consumers. What kind of innovations can we do to bring products to them? And then we can really balance our supply and demand issues, I think.
Great. So I think we have time for just one more question. The final question is, methane produced by cows in production of food needed for cows is significantly proven high source of greenhouse gases in the food industry. How much more efficient can you make cows to combat the effect of climate change? Don't newer biotech versions of converting cellulose to more bioavailable nutrients outspace the efficiency of cows?
Okay, that's a long question. So let me make sure I understand that question. So the question is, can we not use something besides a cow to convert cellulose to other, usable materials for us? Is that the question?
I believe so. I believe so, yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that statement, and I'll tell you why. Let's think about protein just for a minute, dietary protein. All dietary protein is not created equal, okay? Certain proteins, and we think about pea protein is a big one that's been coming up recently. Pea protein is a good protein in its own right, but it is not as good a quality of protein as most of the animal proteins are. We start talking about egg protein, we start talking about fish protein, we start talking about pork and beef protein sources. Those are higher quality proteins than any plant source protein we have. And when I'm talking quality, I'm talking essential amino acids delivered to humans. Now we have the sort of base level of amino acids that prevent deficiency. That's what the recommendations are based on. But certain groups of our social demographic have to have actually higher levels of certain amino acids. For example, highly trained athletes. they need higher levels of, for example, branched chain amino acids than do some of people who are more sedentary. And so for those groups, we've got to be able to deliver a super high quality protein that will deliver those branched chain amino acids, which are at a lower level in all plant proteins. Okay, so now let's talk about cellulose efficiency. Yeah, maybe we can use cellulose and convert it to some of these things in a, I don't know, a fermentation tank of some kind using yeast or molds or various other, you know, microbial bacteria or whatever like that. But I'm not sure that we're going to be able to produce the same high quality protein and the range of high quality proteins that you find in cows by doing that. So can you do it more efficiently? Yeah, maybe on a gram per gram of protein basis you might be able to, but I don't think you can do it on a quality per quality of protein basis.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. White and Dr. Bastian, for your time, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Please register for the annual meeting, ADSA, happening in June. Thank you again for tuning in, and this is the end. Thank you so much.